This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez, and our guest is Congressmember Alan Grayson from Florida. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and has a website, don'tattacksyria.com. Congressmember Grayson, I wanted to ask you about the role of AIPAC. There's been this whole controversy now about a New York Times article. The Times is facing questioning this week after a passage on the influence of AIPAC, the powerful pro-Israel lobbying group on the Syria discussion, seemed to disappear from its reports. In an article that appeared in Monday's newspaper, the Times quoted an unnamed Obama administration official calling AIPAC the 800-pound gorilla in the room because, quote, its allies in Congress have to be saying if the White House is not capable of enforcing this red line against catastrophic use of chemical weapons, we're in trouble. That passage appeared to be missing from later editions of the story. Well, the New York Times public editor, Margaret Sullivan, addressed the concern, saying it had a mundane explanation. She wrote, quote, on a moving story about President Obama in Syria, some information that appeared in a Sunday to Monday story was carried over to a new Monday to Tuesday front page story. That new story was appropriately assigned a new URL, assuring it would be archived separately. Once new information came along, a great deal of old information, including the AIPAC quote, was replaced. But that issue of AIPAC's role in lobbying Congress members now and senators around a strike on Syria, can you talk about its presence in the House?
Well, AIPAC has issued a statement saying that they're in favor of an attack, and many other organizations have done the same, and many other organizations, even more organizations, have done a statement saying that they're against it. But at this point, it's not relevant because the public is engaged, the public is paying attention, the public is against this, and the public is adamantly against this. All these organizations sort of fall to the wayside when the public weighs in. There are now both Democratic and Republican members of Congress who have reported that their emails and letters and phone calls to their office are running more than 100 to 1 against this. People are against it. They're adamantly against it. At our website that you mentioned, don'tattacksyria.com, in almost no time, we've attracted 35 signatures on our petition to the Congress and to the President, and we're going to take those signatures and deliver them to the individual members of Congress, showing in some cases hundreds, if not thousands, of their own constituents are against this attack. So any organization like AIPAC or otherwise cannot operate effectively in the environment that we're in, where the public is speaking, and speaking very loudly.
And Congressman Grayson, could you talk about the impact of this crisis now and this the administration's push for this vote? And obviously this is going to play out now over several weeks on the existing agenda of the Congress. I mean, the issues of immigration reform, the issues of the budget, of the approval of a new Federal Reserve chairman. All of these things now, it seems to me, are going to be delayed or possibly even in case of immigration reform that may die as a result of this new debate now over what to do in Syria.
It's far worse than that. It's far worse than what you're saying. We are 3 weeks away from the government shutting down. We are 5 weeks away from the government running out of money. And we've already spent 2 weeks engaged in a subject where almost everyone feels it's simply not our responsibility. I said on MSNBC recently that the entire U.S. government, both Democratic and Republican, seems to be suffering from a very bad case of attention deficit disorder. We're not showing any ability to focus on the things that actually matter in the lives of our constituents. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse.
You know, something that's interesting that we're seeing happening is a kind of realignment of Republicans and Democrats. You have nothing of the kind of quagmire that has been referred to. For example, in Florida, your fellow Congress member, Ted Yoho, Republican, has announced, like you, his opposition to military intervention in Syria. Yesterday, he asked Secretary of State Kerry why the U.S. should intervene. This is Yoho, followed by Kerry.
Why is it always America out front?
When you ask the question, why does the United States have to be out there? Well, because what our forebears and, what those you ever been to the cemetery in France, above those beaches? Why'd those guys have to go do that? Because we were standing up with people for a set of values and fighting for freedom, and no country has liberated as much land or fought as many battles as the United States of America and turned around and given it back to the people who live there and who can own it and run it. We are the indispensable nation. This is because of who we are and what we've achieved, and we should be proud of it. And we have a great tradition to try to live up to in terms of trying to help people to see a peaceful road, not a road of jihadism. A lot of people out in the Middle East count on us, moderate Arab world, not religious extremists. They count on us to help them be able to transition. That's part of what the Arab Spring is about, and it's not going to end quickly. It's not going to be over just like that. Our own struggle for freedom took a long time. So I think we have to have a longer view here. Now, I think we have to think about the ways in which we can protect ourselves, and I guarantee you, if we don't stand up against chemical weapons in this instance, we are not serving our national security interests.
Congressmember Alan Grayson, if you could respond to the 2 points. One is you're joining with other Republicans in a way you haven't before. And two, this issue of, well, the red line. President Obama yesterday at the news conference said he didn't draw the red line. The international community did.
Well, first of all, what you have is a coalition of people who are listening to popular opinion, and an overwhelmingly powerful coalition listening to overwhelmingly powerful public opinion. The public simply doesn't want this. We have 20 million people in this country who are looking for full-time work. We have almost 50 million people in this country who rely upon the government to feed them. We have almost 40 million people in this country who can't see a doctor when they're sick. That's what actually matters in the lives of Americans, not these high-flown ideals that have nothing to do with the safety of Americans. Let's remember that we changed the name of the War Department to the Defense Department generations ago. And we did that because its assignment is to defend Americans and defend our allies, not be a police officer for the world, much less a judge, jury, and executioner for the world. That's simply not what America wants. It's not even constitutional.
Congressman, I want to play rare public remarks by David Shedd, the Deputy Director of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. He spoke in July at the Aspen Institute about Syria and the regional implications of violence there.
I think that Syria poses for us one of the biggest challenges in the Middle East, and in particular in the Levant, and that is, as some have termed it, if the Arab awakening and the Arab Spring was largely outside of Syria about implosions, Syria is explosive. I think we currently have the makings of a very critical war between the Sunni and Shia. I think the challenges that we face in terms of unfathomable violence is yet to come. I am very concerned about Jordan. I'm very concerned about Iraq and the fallout of any outcome, actually, in terms of Syria. I'm concerned about Jordan. And so as I look across those countries, I think if Bashar Assad were to succeed, he will be a more ruthless leader who will live with a legacy of tens of thousands of his civilians killed under him. If he loses and, let's pretend, goes to an enclave inside there, I think there will be ongoing civil war for years to come. And I would be most concerned about Lebanon falling next.
That was David Shedd, the Deputy Director of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, speaking at the Aspen Security Forum in July. Congressman Grayson, your response?
Well, there's been an enormous amount of pearl clutching by these so-called experts about what might or might not happen in Syria. We've had a civil war now for several years there, which has managed to conduct itself without our intervention up to this point. And we're likely to have it for some time in the future. I will point out to you that there's more people who died last year in the Mexican drug war than died in Syria. But leaving that aside, there are conflicts like this all over the world. When I speak to my constituents in Orlando, I don't think they care. And I understand why they don't care. It has nothing to do with their lives. We have to concentrate on solving our problems. We have to concentrate on doing the things that are needed to meet our own human needs. We cannot dictate, much less even influence, what goes on in Syria. It started as a civil war. It's evolving into a proxy war between Shiite Muslim fundamentalists and Sunni Muslim fundamentalists, both of whom historically are our enemies. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think that Palin actually has this right. Let Allah sort it out.
I wanted to turn to Secretary of State Kerry yesterday. This was 2 days ago, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Kerry admitted there are some scenarios. You know, he was very busy with a mantra of no boots on the ground. But when pushed, he reflected that some scenarios might exist when the president might decide to send troops into Syria.
In the event there was a threat of a chemical weapons cache falling into the hands of al-Nusra or someone else, and it was clearly in the interests of our allies and all of us, the British, the French, and others, to prevent those weapons of mass destruction falling into the hands of the worst elements. I don't want to take off the table an option that might or might not be available to a president of the United States to secure our country.
This is extremely revealing, Congressmember Alan Grayson, and the Defense Intelligence official, Shed, at the Aspen Security Forum also talked about this possibility of the bigger effects of what could happen in Syria. Here you have Kerry talking about what if it implodes and the effects on other countries.
Listen, it's clear that if the Syrian government does anything other than simply taking a pounding and ignoring it and brushing it off, and it retaliates in virtually any way, then there will be a war between Syria and the United States, and it will involve boots on the ground. If Syria, for instance, responds to our missile attack with a missile attack against our ships in the Mediterranean and sinks one of them, there'll be war. If they respond to our missile attack with a missile attack against the Beirut embassy, the U.S. embassy in Beirut, which is, by the way, 15 miles from the Syrian border, a 2-minute flight in a MiG bomber, there'll be war. You can't start something like this and ever foresee what the consequences will be, but history tells us that when you start a war, you're going to end up with war. The only thing you can really be sure of in a situation like this, when you're starting a war, is that you can't be sure of anything.
And Congressman, there is, as we have noted on the show, the fact that doesn't get much attention that Syria and Iran have a mutual defense pact with each other, and that any attack on Syria could possibly draw some response from Iran as well.
From Iran, from Hezbollah, you know, the Hezbollah forces are literally down the block from the U.S. embassy in Beirut, and we're not talking about a hypothetical. That embassy actually was attacked, and it was taken over once before. So, you know, I think the administration is not thinking these things through. This is a very dangerous undertaking. There's no telling where it might end up, except for the fact that history tells us that when you start things like this, it's very difficult to end them. Remember how World War I got started, by accident.
The Defense Secretary, Hagel, was asked about the cost of this. He said something like tens of millions of dollars. Of course, we know that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost far more than originally stated. We're talking about trillions upon trillions of dollars. How would you like to see that money spent?
Well, first, with regard to your question and the framing of it, there are other public estimates right now of the cost of this, including estimates from the general who testified next to Senator Kerry yesterday that run as high as $500 million a week. That's $500 million a week, depending upon what specific option is chosen to try to respond to the chemical weapon attacks. So we're talking about far larger sums of money. The best guess at this point is that the attack we're talking about here, as it's been described in general terms, will cost $1 billion. That's $1 billion that could be spent, at least in part, on humanitarian aid to help the almost 2 million refugees who are now in Jordan and Turkey. It's also $1 billion that can be used for domestic needs. We're living in a time where we've actually cut food stamps. We've cut home heating oil support for people in the winter. We've cut the budget for the FAA to keep planes from falling out of the sky. And we've cut all sorts of security budgets, justice budgets, and so on. And it seems to me that this is the wrong time to be spending more on our so-called defense when this is a matter that doesn't even involve our so-called defense. I will tell you that in the hearing yesterday, I specifically asked, will you be coming back to Congress for more money after this attack comes, more money for the Defense Department in the budget? And the answer was maybe.
What happens if the House Foreign Affairs Committee votes this down? The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has voted for it. It was close. It was 10-7, Democrats and Republicans on both sides. But what happens then?
Well, I predict, this is not clear at this point because no commitment's been made, but I think what they'll do is simply take the Senate resolution and have it voted on the floor of the House. They might try to route it through my committee. They might not. But given the time frame that's involved and the fact that the Senate isn't going to act until toward the end of next week, the fact that the President said he wants an immediate answer, procedurally, without going through a lengthy markup in our committee, you couldn't do that routing it through our committee. You'd have to put it on the floor of the House. As I indicated earlier, the vote at this point is overwhelming against this, almost 10-1 against this, according to the members who have already committed. So I'm not even sure they'd go to that length unless they want to simply put it out there to be defeated.
We want to thank you very much for being with us. Congressmember Alan Grayson, a Democrat of Florida's 9th Congressional District, opposes the U.S. strike on Syria and has set up a website, don'tattacksyria.com, where he's gathering signatures for a petition calling on Congress to deny permission to attack Syria. When we come back, a debate among two members of the Syrian opposition on whether the U.S. should strike their country. Stay with us.